Live. Hello, hello, and we are just going live, and we are live. Hey everyone, this is the Abdullah Samir Show. I have a show now. That's what I call it, and let's get on. Let's get on with it. So I'm joined by Farhan Qureshi, a friend of mine for quite a while actually, and we had a chat like I don't even remember how long ago it was, right? It was quite a while, right? Do you remember
It had
how that happened?
I
How
think
did
over a year ago, probably, right? On your channel.
July?
Maybe
Oh,
it's been a year.
two
Yeah.
years. I just checked.
2 years.
July 2017. Live
Wow.
with Farhan
Okay.
Qureshi. Yeah, just can you imagine? Like we did
Okay,
this
we are
like 2 years ago. We went on live and we didn't know each other at the time. So this was like yeah. Take a look. July 22nd,
Interesting.
2017. Right.
Wow, that's good to go.
Yeah. So that was that. So let's get on with it. So let's talk about your background first of all. You
Hmm.
are an ex Ahmadiyya Muslim, is that correct?
Yeah, definitely.
What's your background as a Muslim? Did you come from a religious Muslim family? Not that religious? Like tell me
Yeah, I
tell
would
me
say
how your
religious.
family okay, so you came from a religious
Yeah,
family, and
right.
how did you end up leaving Islam? Like how did that happen?
Well, I mean, I guess I had to leave the Ahmadiyya community first, right? And
Oh,
right,
really?
in order to be Sunni, so that was like in my late
Oh,
adolescence at
I even
17.
I even forgot you went from Ahmadiyya to Sunni.
Yeah, so that was when I was like 17. So yeah, no, I followed pretty much the Salafi manhaj just like you did, at least in principle. I think perhaps my spirit disagreed with it, but
Wow. So how did that happen? Remind me how
right.
that happened.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of my family, they're pretty religious, very good folks, very innocent, liberal types of folks. My grandfather, though, was a missionary in Africa for 20 years, so he propagated the Ahmadiyya religion or movement or community or what have you. And so our family was pretty religious. There's missionaries in our family and that type of thing. Um, and at the time, just like when we started the conversation, perhaps 2 years ago, I definitely remember this. What the whole idea was that is this person who's claiming to be the second coming of Jesus? Can we take that claim to be seriously? Or can we take that claim as a serious claim? And so I was just skeptical of this whole idea of him being the second coming of Jesus and whatnot. Although their argument that it's absurd to think that Jesus is going to fly down from the sky at the end of times is a legitimate concern and objection, I think. Now in retrospect, I'm able to see that a little bit more clearly. Can we take? But so yeah, so no, I think so in terms of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the idea was back then it was more so my spiritual experiences in the Muslim community, seeing that there's a higher level of scholarship there, a better understanding of traditional Islam and what the Quran and the Sunnah actually teach, and that this is a classical understanding that goes back 1400 years, and that it was antithetical to what the Ahmadis were teaching in a number of different ways. Obviously, there's Khatam al-Nubuwah, the finality of prophethood, the second coming of Jesus as the primary differences between the two schools of
Mm.
thought,
But
or two denominations.
a lot of people tell me that Salafis are not orthodox. The bid'ah, the invention, like the movement that was founded by Ibn Taymiyyah, and basically it went from there. So like I have people like regularly tell me now that no, you were not a proper Sunni Muslim. You didn't understand Islam properly. You believed in an anthropomorphic God with hands and legs and a face and a shin, and
Sure.
Bilal Phillips used to say that Bilal Phillips and everybody says that
Right.
Allah has hands, but they're not like the hands we have, like the clock.
Right.
Whereas when you talk to someone that's a Ashari, basically like a Sufi or someone that's following a madhab, who follows the Ashari school of the Ashari Aqidah, they will
Mhm.
say that Allah has hands, and that might mean His power. Allah's throne, it might be His dominion. Like they don't take hands as hands and legs as like, even though Bilal Phillips and the Salafis do say that these are not actual legs. Now, what I find is when it comes to ex-Muslims and also opponents of Islam, they love picking on this religion of Islam, the Salafism, right?
Right.
It's almost like an easier target because in some ways it's quite ludicrous, right? Like if the hadith says that Allah, puts his leg into the hellfire and says enough, and it says like no more people are coming to hell. Like they say, well, you believe in a God that has a leg, right? But did you believe in a God that had legs and hands? Like that's not what I believed.
Right. So when I thought about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala back then, right? Azza wa Jalla, back then, I bought into the idea that, even if Allah has hands, even if Allah has a face, it's not like our face, right? That's the typical argument that they'll give. And so I can't fathom Allah. And I pretty much just took that as, okay, well, it's not an anthropomorphism too literally. It's simply that we can't fathom that there might be some literal aspect, maybe divinity has or Allah has hands and stuff like that, but we can't fathom it or understand it. But there's some type of physiological or existential reality to his hands but it's not his power. It's something literal. We just can't fathom it. So I bought into that whole argument. But in terms of what you said about, the Salafis are the ones who are Ahl al-Bidah, I mean, I think that's funny. But I mean, I think that they literally do derive their theology from the Salaf. And it really does go back to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and some of the more classical scholars back then, Ibn Kathir and the rest of it. And so I do think that they have a methodology by which they derive their theology that is much more coherent than any of the Sufi tariqas. The Sufi tariqas will get like one small little practice that they'll find in some hadith and say and then justify something like muraqabah, which is muraqabah. So that's a Sufi version of meditation.
So the interesting thing is, the Salafis are more strict about adhering to the texts, but and they're more strict about what they do. But the Sufis, like you said, they're more open-minded in the interpretation. They're willing to use weak hadith, weak practices, like for example, Salatul Tasbih, where you say, I don't even remember, like it's some it's like a 15-minute prayer, like it's such a long thing where you say like 1,000 times. I don't even remember what it is, but it's basically like based on a weak hadith, right? So and the Ash'ari school of thought has like a lot of influence, I think, from Greek philosophy.
For sure.
So in my opinion, like the Ash'ari Aqidah is more coherent than to say that there's an Allah that comes down to the lowest heaven every night, because you run into the problem of like, how do you make sense of Allah coming down to the lowest heaven at night when it's always night somewhere in the world? So either there's a misunderstanding from Muhammad, or you have to like somehow hand wave and come up with a way of reinterpreting this, right? And so like I said, my Sufi friends now tell me that, Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah were the ones that actually really pushed this, right? And now, of course, in today's world, it's the Saudis, right, that are pushing this. And as well, would you agree that, like, let me ask you, did you not, were you at all like, did you at all look into Sufism, or like how did you just bypass that completely?
Oh no, I didn't. I definitely didn't bypass it. I looked into it. It was, as I've said before, it was alien to what I understood Islam to be. It was a foreign religion. It was not. I would say Ahmadis are closer to Salafis than Sufis. Right, when you actually study the theology, a lot of what the Salafis say is shirk and bid'ah. The Ahmadis would agree with that. So there's no dancing, there's no chanting, there's no, there's no meditation, muraqabah. But just a quick clarification: you have ilm al-kalam in the mutakallimin, and that is what is derivative of philosophical inquiry or scholastic theological discourse within the context of a philosophical inquiry. That Imam Ashari and the Maturidi schools are okay with. The fuqaha, at least the best that we know, meaning Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Shafi, Imam Maliki, they were completely against philosophy.
Whoa. Say that again?
So the four fuqaha, Imam Ahmad and Imam Abu Hanifa, they were against philosophy.
Oh, wow.
So they made statements that, that don't get involved in this, blah, blah, blah. But eventually they had to deal with the philosophical issues. And so that's kind of how the Ashari Maturidi schools developed, where they were allowed to do some philosophical inquiry. And this is where Hamid al-Ghazali, using philosophy and using the methodology of the philosophers that were challenging the mainstream interpretation, were able to counter it. And so with ilm al-kalam and the mutakallimin, you do have the ability to use philosophy, which is what I find interesting. You have somebody like Muhammad Hijab, who I assume to be a Salafi. I haven't seen him claim to be a Salafi, but then they're using, and same thing with Hamza Zorsis. I don't know if they're Ikhwani, or if they're Ikhwani, that explains it. But if they're Salafi, I find it interesting that they're interested in studying philosophy and philosophical arguments, because they're not allowed.
Yeah.
And so there's that whole aspect of kalam, and then there's fiqh, and then there's tasawwuf. So tasawwuf is
let's define those words. So kalam, how do you define kalam?
So where do we find kalam from?
How do you define it? Just because people might not be familiar with all these terms.
Kalam, so ilm al-kalam, so obviously the word, it means word, but ilm al-kalam is philosophical inquiry. It's it's scholastic theological discourse using logic and whatnot. So that's what ilm al-kalam is, and that's its own theological framework from which Asharis and Maturidis operate, and the purists or the traditionalists or the literalists, which are the Salafis, are not big fans of how they interpret using philosophy. So that's why I'm interested in how some Salafis are using philosophy, studying philosophy, when they're not really allowed. But maybe they're not Salafi.
It's very difficult to be a Salafi and to continue on the path of giving dawah and debating people without studying philosophy, because you end up like trapped in the corner, right? Like I said, like just a simple example is Allah comes down to the lowest heaven. Like if you don't have any philosophy, like you just get stuck, right?
Literalism, which is what and they're literalists.
Yeah.
And so that's their issue. And so then you have the tasawwuf. Now here's the thing, I'm always rooting for Sufis to in many different ways, whether it's the Qawwali or whether it's their celebrations or their grave worship or whatever you want to call it.
Qawwalis are the religious songs.
Right, songs with drums sometimes and these little instruments and whatnot. So, so they have that, and muraqabah, and I like how they're mystical and oftentimes liberal. So I love all of that about Sufism. The reality, though, bro, the way Sufism is practiced in today's world requires you to subscribe to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, requires you to be a part of a tariqah.
What's a tariqah?
So a tariqah is a lineage, right? And it's kind of just like the Guru Parampara in Hinduism, right? Like so you have a sheikh that then passes down that knowledge and that wisdom to another sheikh, and literally the lineage goes back to a particular one who founded the tariqah, and then supposedly goes back further to the Prophet Muhammad at some point, or to a hadith or something like that. And so they have these tariqahs where the sheikh is everything, and usually the sheikh has powers, and so sometimes you'll see on YouTube where a Brelvi sheikh will shake somebody's hand and it'll get electrocuted and it'll fly back and its turban flies off. You've probably seen those videos. So I don't know about all that. I do love the chanting and all that. I think that is awesome. And you did a really good impression. I think you were talking to David Wood, the Allah. Yeah. You actually did it. You demonstrated that for it. So yeah, no, I love that part. But no, in terms of the Sufi sheikh, I do think that there's saints and sages out there, and there's beautiful things that come from them, and these things are worthy of admiration sometimes, but then sometimes it goes too far, and the ego of the sheikh becomes overshadowed by things, and then it becomes like a cult and can become dangerous. So it depends on what we mean by Sufism. If we mean the Sufism of Jalaluddin Rumi, if we mean the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, if we mean the Sufism of Mansur al-Hallaj, where they were simply individual mystics in of themselves,
Yeah.
and they had these deep insights and expressed these profound things, then that's a Sufi that's worthy of celebration. But if we're talking about the tariqas that require you to subscribe to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and certain ways of interpreting religion,
So
then you get problems.
Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is basically mainstream Sunnism. That's what they call it. They call it Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which means the people of Sunnah and the congregation. Yes.
Right.
So you found it was kind of like limiting, and especially the whole obeying the sheikh. And does he make you do like silly things, like spinning around, and he beats you, and like he gets rid of your ego with all of these funny tests? Like you have to bark like a dog or something. Oh, you never got into it.
That happens, yeah.
But you never got into it.
I'm sure stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
No, in terms of the Mevlevi Darvish whirlers,
yeah.
I mean, I think that that's fine too, because they get lost in the spinning, and it's like a meditation for them. So I'm not. I mean, I have no problems with the Darvish whirlers.
Yeah. But they're not Sunni Muslims. They're not considered. So I guess that's the challenge of saying Sufi. It's kind of like it's a big range of what Sufi means, right? And many of the Sufis are actually like would be considered apostates to many based on what some of them
like
would be.
Mansur al-Hallaj was killed. There's this story that when they cut Mansur al-Hallaj's head off, I don't know how authentic the story is. He kept on saying his head came off. And it kept repeating "Ana al-Haq, Ana al-Haq," meaning that I'm the truth or I'm God.
Yeah.
So I mean, no, I don't believe that story is true, but I think that it's an interesting one. So yeah, no, they are counted. Then Sarmad was another one in India who got killed for similar things, and so yeah, no, so you do have these individual Sufis.
So do you feel like the whole Ahlus Sunnah is a very limiting philosophy in a sense, because like you said, they're killing people for saying I'm God. Like, was that like, what do you think?
No, I think any dogma will limit you.
Okay.
The idea is, at least from the perspective of postmodernism, is to free ourselves from the dogma and from the identity and from the obligation to subscribe to what the authority says, to be able to think for yourself. I think that's very important for me anyways.
Okay, but now you ascribe yourself to Hinduism. So how do you reconcile first of all, do you think atheism is a dogma too?
Atheism can be dogmatic, right? I mean, I think simply the negation of a belief in God or skepticism of truth claims pertaining to divinity, I think that's perfectly fine. But then there's individuals who can get dogmatic, and then there can be groupthink amongst atheists, meaning that you get involved with certain conversations and certain rhetoric and certain ways of arguing and certain arguments and certain individuals like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, and then it can
blasphemed the gods of atheism.
Right. So it can become dogmatic, and groupthink can occur amongst atheists. But I think that there's plenty of free thinkers, yourself, who's intellectually honest, who when Islam is attacked unjustly, you're able to call it out. That type of thing.
Well, that's because I'm a taqiyya Muslim.
All right. Or that. But no, I don't think that you're doing taqiyya.
So what are the problems you have with Dawkins and Sam Harris?
Oh, I mean, Sam Harris Sam Harris is an individual that I don't say this often, because I've always said that I've never met a person or I've never read about a person, historical or present, that I agree with them on everything or even close to everything, right? Human beings are always going to see things differently, interpret things differently. There's bound to be disagreement. So there will never be an individual that I can ever fathom that I would agree with entirely. But Sam Harris is actually an individual that I agree with dominantly.
Okay.
I mean, but there are certain things that he might say that I disagree with. So I might disagree with him on Islam at times. I might disagree with him on what he means when he says perennial philosophy in his book Waking Up. So for example, when it comes to the perennial philosophy,
let's define what is perennial philosophy first of all.
So there's many different authors, whether it's René Guénon, whether it's Aldous Huxley, whether it's somebody contemporary like Sayyid Hussein Nasser, that I'm sure you talk to an individual. recently, who I hope to talk with soon as well. So there's different. They're considered traditionalists in the sense that perennialists will say that the traditions that have historically existed point to a universal experience of oneness. That's the best way to explain. And that this oneness experience occurs in different minds at different times with different symbols and different cultures and different contexts and whatnot. And so some perennialists will also say that the science also points towards this oneness, whether it's through psychedelics, whether it's through physics and the interdependence of the interdependent web of all existence, how everything is interdependent biologically, chemically, physically. So there's this oneness that knowledge is basically pointing towards. But I think in a perennial sense, we're talking more about mysticism more than anything else. And so that's what the perennial philosophy is. So where I would disagree with Sam Harris is that, and he's correct in his objection, should a universalist or perennialist say this, that all religions are teaching the same thing essentially. That when you actually break down what the theology of traditional religion is teaching, historically, that they're all teaching about this perennial truth, which just isn't true. All religions don't teach this. Mm-hmm. Theology differs, philosophy differs.
Sorry, did you say Sam Harris says that all religions teach the same thing?
Well, he assumes that the perennial philosophy is saying that all religions are teaching the same thing, and that's not perennial philosophy. In its true depiction, that's not what it's saying. It's not saying that all religions are teaching the same thing.
So what is it saying then? Because that's what I thought too, actually. Well, not that they're all teaching the same thing, but like what you said, that there's some higher general truth or something beyond.
That there's this truth of oneness specifically.
The truth of oneness specifically.
Of oneness.
What does that even mean?
So oneness is an experience that all is one.
Okay.
The boundaries.
Wahdatul wujud, like.
Exactly, Wahdatul Wujud, 100%.
So this is like a
Right.
Are you talking about
when we get into Wahdatul Wujud, the Sufis will differ, and so Sufis had problems with Wahdatul Wujud, mm-hmm. So they came up with this other doctrine called Wahdatul Shuhud, that they said that everything isn't actually one, it just appears that way. So then they came up with this whole theology to deny the actual meaning of Wahdatul Wujud. But essentially, yes, it's the unity of all of existence.
And you believe in this? Like, you believe that? Do you like? Okay, let's talk.
Right.
Go ahead.
What I would say is that I perceive this reality on psychedelics.
Okay, can you tell me about that a little bit more? Like, what like you're saying? So meditation and psychedelics are two ways of experiencing something different. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, let's talk about that a bit.
Okay, so I wouldn't say meditation.
No,
I have practiced Buddhist Vipassana types of meditation. I've practiced some Hindu types of approaches to meditation. In terms of,
you don't get loss of self when you do meditation as well. Loss of ego, loss of self when you meditate.
Right. But there's still this in meditation. There's this you would either describe it as shunyata, which is emptiness, a void. There's no boundaries, or you might describe it as satchitananda, which means that is this truth, bliss and consciousness, which is profound, and it is something that can certainly be. I'm sure that it can be experienced through vigorous practice of meditation, mm-hmm. or long practice of meditation. But psychedelics is completely, for me anyway. And here's the thing: even the science shows that the brain is operating in a similar way for somebody who's in deep meditation versus psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. So what psychedelics are we speaking about specifically?
I would be talking about psilocybin, mushrooms, okay. Mescaline, that type of. It's very
DMT.
Similar. No, I would not include DMT on that.
DMT is different. Okay.
DMT is very different. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about shrooms. So what's the experience under shrooms that you're talking about? How do you describe it?
Right. So that is, from a phenomenological, subjective, experiential perspective, is very different than anything that I've experienced on meditation, mindfulness.
Okay.
Now I've heard of others describe that through their practice of meditation that they've experienced these things, similar to what I would have said that I experienced on psychedelics, but I have not experienced it on pure meditation in my life. Mm-hmm. So I can't say.
So what is the experience on the psychedelics?
So now you're asking me to attempt to describe the ineffable. And the best that I can do, all right. So there's different layers of it, right? There's different layers of it, but then when you talk about the oneness experience, that's something that's unique. So on one hand, when it starts to set, it sets in as waves, right? So a little bit happens, and a little bit more happens, and a little bit more happens, type of deal.
I've
And so
experienced that with
obviously
weed.
there's, wait, say it again?
I felt that with weed,
Okay.
like the coming waves thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. I can see that. I mean, it's very cannabis is completely different as well.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't compare.
Okay.
Um, no, not really. All right. So, but anyways, so the first thing that happens is your interaction with the world that you're in becomes quite peculiar. Everything starts to breathe. Everything becomes alive. Right? I don't know how do you. There's no way to explain it, but everything, even the computer monitor, begins to breathe and life, and it's almost as if that there's a presence to everything, as if that there's a relational presence, regardless with what you focus on, and the smallest and most insignificant thing from a bit, your eyes just get absorbed into it, and you go into a trance, and you're just completely involved with that one thing, and it's just the most intriguing, fascinating thing that you could possibly have ever come across.
So,
Yeah.
do you feel like, I mean, we're specifically talking about shrooms here. Do you
Right.
feel like it's giving us like a look into something that's there, but we just can't perceive it normally, or do you think it's making our brain is making up stuff?
So
How do
that's what it, okay, so from a subjective point of view, right? That's what it seems like, that this is always happening, but we're simply not aware of it. So that's what it seems like. And I do want to start off with caveats because I always get into these conversations about psychedelics without these caveats, and we always should give these caveats. I don't think that most people can handle this stuff. I don't think if there's a therapist involved, if there's a shaman involved that's actually responsible, then yes, you know what I mean? Then that might be something that you explore. That might be something that you want to research for a year or 2 years before you actually do it. I think that there's a lot of people that I know personally that would not be able to handle it. Simply overwhelming. They don't have any self-control or emotional regulation to begin with, and so you never know. And so there should always be precaution, and you should be very responsible and that sort of thing with these type of things.
So kids,
I mean, I definitely.
so basically kids don't try this at
Oh,
home.
definitely not. And obviously, children, from a brain neuroscience standpoint, the brain is fully developed when you're 25, and so you always have to be very careful with these type of things for sure. All right. Now that being said, you may continue.
So
Yeah.
did this have did this like these trips have any sort of transformational changes for you, or like?
Oh, for sure, definitely. Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh.
So the easiest thing that happens is that you are, and this is actually happens from what I found in Dr. Roland Griffith's experiments at Johns Hopkins University, is that there is no more, that there's an acceptance of one's own demise or one's own death. Like you're completely content with everything.
Amazing.
Yeah, the level of equanimity that we never experience because we're always worried, we're always stressed, we're always plotting and thinking and evaluating and that sort of thing. But but once you hit that where everything's just the mind becomes so quiet, and there's this level of equanimity and bliss that you just can't replicate it in any other situation.
But it's
So
different. It's different than the weed bliss.
Oh, it's completely different.
Totally
As a matter of fact, marijuana might even cause you to become paranoid, right?
I
And I'm not saying that psychedelics can't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that a person is really on a high dose that, just because of how intense everything is, that they could get hurt. But no, I mean, no, it's a very different quality.
What do you think about the science of psychedelics? Like, they show, what I understood is, they actually turn down the default mode network in our brain, which is what creates a sense of ego and what creates a sense of self, what differentiates me from the world.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was How to Change Your Mind by Malcolm Pollan. I was listening to his book
Mm-hmm.
on
Right.
Audible, and he was saying that like something to the effect of like if we were just going around in complete like awe of like the trees and the stars and everything, we would
Yeah.
never go hunting or trying to find a mate, and we just
Yeah.
all die. So we
Pretty
haven't
much.
we haven't evolved to be like walking around in these sort of states.
Right.
But you would say it's not just our brain creating an illusion, but it's actually something that's real for you.
Well, I mean, from my experience of psychedelics, while I was on it, and in reflection of it afterwards, the subjective perception of it is that this is what quote unquote more real than real, meaning that the world that I'm in is constructed. That's what that means, and
Fascinating.
that whatever I'm experiencing is more true than this construct, this creation, if you will.
Wow.
So that's the perception, anyways, from a first person point of view. Now, in terms of the brain chemistry, anatomy, and physiology argument, the reason why I dismiss it so easily is because the brain constructs everything,
Hmm.
right? I mean, what isn't constructed by the brain? Every texture, every smell, every color, um, the type of deal, all of that's constructed. When you think about fundamental reality, I mean, it's nothing but molecules and atoms and waves and vibrations going on everywhere. I mean, what is that? Right.
That's true. Do you believe in like what is it called? Idealism? That
Subject, yeah, ideal. I
Can
mean,
you explain
ideal.
what that
Yeah.
means?
So, all right, so it's a little bit different. Okay, so there's a slight difference between the idealism described by the Greeks and the Enlightenment philosophers, and I don't like using the word believe, but what I perceive, right? And that difference is that in Vedanta or Hinduism, the focus is on consciousness, whereas in idealism, the focus is on mind. So somebody like Plato or Berkeley, they might say that everything is mind, right? And they would say it's the mind of God. Uh,
Yes.
it is God, right?
Oh,
So there's
okay.
that similarity.
Mm-hmm.
But consciousness is existence or beingness or existence or consciousness or awareness of existence,
Oh.
which is what Vedanta focuses on. It says that the mind is a construct within the field of consciousness, right? And so I'm not sure that the idealists or necessarily the idealists would or traditionally have made that distinction like Vedanta has or as Hinduism has, but there is that small difference. But it's so identical in the sense that the idealist and the Vedantist both say that the fundamental nature of reality is not material, that it's spiritual or consciousness or this field that we don't truly understand yet.
So you practice Advaita Vedanta, is it? Oh.
So Advaita is a philosophy. The word Advaita literally means non-duality or oneness
Uh-huh.
or monism, essentially. And Vedanta is the historical articulation, or it literally means the end of knowledge, or the articulation of where knowledge is leading to, which is oneness or Advaita. And then so you have some classical Vedantists like Adi Shankaracharya and Madhva and so there's this lineage of Advaitin thinkers who articulate different arguments as it pertains to what non-duality is and what it means, the wave versus the ocean type deal. And so yeah, I mean, I think that the Advaita Vedanta is the best articulation of the non-dual experience, although I always caveat this with the Tao Te Ching of the Chinese, because that is a pretty profound document on oneness as well. But besides those two, Vedanta and the Tao Te Ching, I haven't found a philosophical articulation of the non-dual experience better than those two.
So just to go back just quickly, not how did you end up leaving Islam eventually?
Right. So that was a crisis over Jahannam primarily.
Ah.
Yeah. So in terms of like when I was studying psychology and human behavior, what I came to the conclusion was that an atheist is an atheist because they generally perceive all religion as bogus
Mm-hmm.
and they have no religion to subscribe to any theology. that a Christian is genuinely a Christian because that is, in their mind, that is how they perceive reality, and they genuinely think that that's true. So there's this notion of this empirical reality that perception is relative.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought to myself that who, in the right state of mind, would reject truth knowing that they would go to hell forever? And whether this notion of burning and being tortured forever for eternity, because your theology was wrong, you couldn't figure out the mystery, whether that made any sense at all, but whether I have any reason to believe that, whether I have any evidence to believe that, and why would I believe that? So that's kind of the whole idea of Jahannam. Once I realized what the religion was teaching, I was like, this is definitely not the truth, and that just opened up everything else for me, in terms of what Islam is and whether it's the truth
and
or not.
how did you go from that to Hinduism? Why did you end up with Hinduism and not like atheism?
Right. And so I mean,
or Christianity. You were
okay.
good. You were in close contact with Nabil, right? Nabil Qureshi.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he ended up as a Christian, but you ended up as a Hindu. How did that happen?
Right. So him becoming a Christian, he saw some dreams, and it was a combination of his dreams. It was a combination of him being friends with David Wood and them debating over 5 years. Mm-hmm. Where did Abdullah go? You still there, bro?
Yeah, I'm still here. Keep going.
Okay, cool. So yeah, then him having dreams and stuff like that, and then him finding the argument that Jesus was resurrected from the dead as convincing. So those were the reasons why he became a Christian. So I wasn't buying it because it's the same exclusivity hell issue.
Okay,
right?
But
It's the same issue with Christianity.
So both of them have the same problem of hell.
Right.
You don't buy that Jesus was resurrected from the dead?
No, I don't. I reject. Here's the thing: as growing up as an Ahmadi, I always rejected miracles. Right? Because Ahmadis reject miracles. They believe in evolution and so. But okay, when I was a Sunni, I opened up my imagination a little bit, but I've always been a rationalist in the sense that I need evidence, and there's no substantiated miracle ever. And there's no reason to believe that miracles of this sort ever occur. I mean, I don't have any reason to believe any miracles ever occurred. And so Jesus walking on water and the virgin birth and being resurrected from the dead, I have no reason to believe that any of that's true. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, I love people who believe these types of things.
Yep.
It's their prerogative to believe whatever they want. I don't make fun of them personally. I allow others to make fun of them, and I laugh at others making fun of them, but I personally don't choose to do that. For a variety of reasons. I love and respect people, and I don't want to offend people. That's my choice. Mm-hmm. So, but no idea if it.
So you were not convinced. You're not convinced that God had a son and he died and he came back to life and people saw that. So how do you explain the Bible and all that? Like, how do you make sense of that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, first, I think that these were historical attempts by people, some of whom might have had mystical experiences, others who were simply following a tradition and added on to what was there previously. So I think that this is what we should expect human beings to do. It's the same reason how science developed, is how philosophy developed. It is the human inquiry into existence, into suffering, into death, into the big existential questions, right?
And what do you say about Muhammad?
So it's the same thing. I think that I think that he was based on what I've read about him. It seems like he was having mystical experiences. So that's why I'm open. Just like in our first conversation, I'm open to that temporal lobe epilepsy argument. That could have been what ultimately triggered him and led him to the cave of Hira, et cetera, et cetera. So. No, I do think that many of these individuals were having genuine mystical experiences, and they tried to interpret their own experience, and that's how you get organized religion. Unfortunately, what happens is when somebody has these mystical experiences, all of a sudden, I'm having these insights and these mystical experiences, I must be the Messiah, I must be the prophet of God. Mm-hmm. And so I don't, now from that perspective, I don't get, well, I mean, that's because I can appreciate that everybody and anybody can have these experiences and insights. But back then, there's this individual who's having these mystical experiences due to variant brain chemistry. Others might not have that variant brain chemistry, might not be experiencing what he's experiencing. But there's usually profound things that come out of a person who's having mystical experiences. And so that's what I think. That's how I explain all religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
All religion. This is how it all developed. And so yeah, I mean I just think that that's all that it is, to be honest.
Mm. And just to give a shout out, you're planning to have a debate with Muhammad Hijab, is it?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. So I need to fly down there to the UK. I'm not sure if he's willing to have it over. As a matter of fact, I would want to be personally. I would want to be in his backyard. I am not scared of nobody. You can have 100 Muslims around me. I am not scared of nobody. I have no stigma towards Islam and Muslims. I love Islam and Muslims. So I have nothing to fear.
Awesome.
Nobody, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna kill me, and you know, even if they do, you know, I think that they were deterred that they just couldn't handle it and probably had mental health issues.
Yeah.
Same way I explain a lot of things.
Yeah, well,
So
I wouldn't I don't think anything would happen to you either. I do think they'd probably treat you quite well. You'd be a guest
yes,
and all
yes,
that. And I think Muslims nowadays would be more curious to talk to you and see how, you know, what your positions are and all that.
sure.
It's interesting. I was watching a clip of what David Wood uploaded of Muhammad Hijab, which it seemed like he was intentionally straw manning what David Wood was saying. And
Yeah,
it was
I
quite
remember that.
it was quite disturbing because
Yeah,
he was like accusing him of like mistranslating it, and
yeah,
David Wood didn't mistranslate it. It was just
no,
like, and then the crowd was being like, David,
right.
Muhammad Hijab, Allahu Akbar, and it was like David Wood was getting
Right,
like frustrated. Like it was like this is not fair, right? Like if
right.
you're the moderator, I don't know. Maybe they like that. Maybe moderators
No,
like
it
people
wasn't
going
fair.
crazy.
It would have been intellectually honest for Hijab to come out and admit that. He
Yeah,
should have.
yeah.
I mean, he didn't. But you know, that's the human condition, nafsi, nafsi. I
That's
mean,
from
but the
Islam.
thing you have to in that type of a situation. Here's the thing. You know, Hijab is a fan of mixed martial arts. I'm a fan of mixed martial arts as well. I know he does jujitsu and stuff like that. I don't think he's allowed to hit anybody. But you know, you could tell from his personality. He wants it to be competitive. He wants it. You know, it's like an MMA match. And in order to hype up an MMA match, you got to talk some trash. You got to have a little bit of nuffs in you. And so, you know, I enjoy that a little bit from Hijab, so long as we, you know, so long as, you know, we admit that that's what's going on, and you know that we can have a cordial, serious conversation about the nature of reality. I mean, you could. I mean, it's not even in the field of straw man. It becomes borderline ad hominem,
Yeah,
where you're just mocking and making fun of the person. Oh, you don't know Arabic. Let me give you an Arabic lesson.
yeah,
You know, it's egotistical, but you know, in terms of the fun aspect of it,
yeah. It's
you know,
showmanship,
the
right?
competitive, the showman aspect, it can be fun, but you're claiming to represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Muslim ummah, and you know, you want to have a serious, you want to have a serious conversation and influence people towards your perspective. It could backfire in the hearts and minds of a lot of people who don't respond to that well.
Mm.
So that's his, I mean, it's up to him how he carries himself.
Okay. So looking forward to that when that happens.
Oh, I can't wait, man. I'm gonna bring it. I'm gonna bring it. I'm gonna bring it.
Can't wait as
For sure.
well. So what happened? How did you end up as a Hindu? Like, and can you define your Hinduism to us? Like,
Sure.
I know that part of it was you. Oh, actually, I'll let you explain. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, right. So once you have the mystical experience, and then as I tried to study what this is and whether what this means and stuff like that. Like I said, the best articulation that I found was from the Chinese and from the Hindus. The Greeks did well with oneness as well, but not nowhere close to what the Vedanta did. And so. And then meditation was a side thing. I was just, you know, at Sam Harris and others that I was looking into meditation and mindfulness, and then eventually, you know, tried some hatha yoga and got some benefits from hatha yoga and pranayama practices as well. And so these methods were working for me apart from me studying Advaita
So
or looking at
what do you mean working for you? What methods? Like meditation?
meditation, mindfulness, the breath work, pranayama,
Like
hatha yoga.
what was working for you? Like what was happening?
So a couple of, well, it depends on what you mean. So there's a couple of things that happen. Obviously, number one, it allows you to take a step back, and it allows you to slow down your perception, to be less impulsive, be less reactive, that sort of thing. It allows you to pay attention to subtleties that you normally wouldn't pay attention to. Meditation in of itself can give you a stress reduction and that blissful experience to empty the mind type deal. And then, so there was those things aspect. And then with the hatha yoga, there's blood flow, there's oxygen flow, there's endorphins, there's energy that you get from whether it's a workout at the gym or from hatha yoga. So there's that aspect of it. And I began to see how these practices lead towards a natural interaction with others in the world that you're in that is more peaceful, it's more equanimous, it's more accepting, it's more embracing. So I felt that these practices were causing a natural shift in my psychology and biology.
So I mean, I don't do hatha yoga, but many non-Hindus do hatha yoga. I practice mindfulness and sometimes meditation. Why did you want to take on the Hindu identity and the Hindu label and call yourself so being the word Hindu comes with the worship, usually, I don't know, could be wrong, but the worship of like the Hindu avatars.
Sure.
So do you do that as well? Do you worship Krishna or Shiva or I don't know, Ram?
But I think my Ishtadeva is what
What does that mean? Ishtadeva?
Ishtadeva is basically your favorite deity.
Oh,
right?
okay.
However you want to envision God. But no, then yeah. So let me jump back just a little bit.
Yeah.
Let me jump back a little bit.
Also, I want you to talk about what you believe about God as well. What is God? Who is God?
Sure. Yeah. All right. But so just to answer your question about why Hinduism specifically. So you have to understand that there's these different angles that are happening in my life. On one hand, there's the experience of non-duality, and Advaita does the best job in describing that.
I hate to interrupt you again. What do you mean the experience of non-duality? Like from the
psychedelics? The dissolving of the ego, the boundaries go away, everything is all one.
So the psychedelics, you mean?
Right. So psychedelics, on that experience, Advaita was a philosophy that best described it. So there's that one angle to it, right?
Ah, okay.
And then there's another angle of the practices, the methodologies, which I limit to meditation, mindfulness, pranayama, and hatha yoga. So these practices started to work for me. So that's number 2. Number 3, as a student of psychology, and particularly studying the archetypes in a Jungian, Jordan Peterson sense. This was you have to understand this was a separate category of interest, though, which had nothing to do with hatha yoga, meditation, mindfulness, which had nothing to do with the Advaita psychedelic experience. And then it's just, so when I delved into the archetypes concept, I began to see all of the various mythologies and stories, even contemporary, whether it's Harry Potter, Star Wars, whatever, in this light. And I found that the Hindu canon of mythology, of Puranas or the legends and stuff like folklore was pretty much identical to what the Jungian archetypes were describing.
Sorry, what are the Jungian archetypes?
So there's numerous ones that Carl Jung talked about, but obviously there's a plethora beyond that. But you have like the hero, the hero of the story, or you have the villain or the jester or the jokester. So there's different types of archetypes that fulfill different characters and different personalities throughout the human spectrum.
Okay.
And so for example, Walid is a comedian. So that's more of the jester archetype, right?
What am I?
Right. I don't know. I don't know. You know what I mean? Take a personality test. Take the Myers-Briggs, and we'll have a better idea.
Okay.
Right. I don't want, and I'm not one to stereotype folks, but there's certain there's certain traits that come out that predominate in a particular individual or in a particular character in a movie.
Okay.
And so there's these different archetypes. There's different personalities. Another good word for archetype is personality, because there's traits and all this kind of stuff that go with it. So I was studying that, and then I found the Shiva archetype to be compelling. This is the shaman, this is the yogi, this is the hermit, this is the prophet of God. So what Muslims would call prophets of God, that's the equivalent of the shaman, the yogi. Now, granted, prophets of God in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, they do. Okay, with Christianity they do. With Jesus is a healer, but usually the shaman, the yogi, and the hermit is also depicted as a healer, right? Somebody who brings about healing in others who are suffering. whether through a philosophy or through some other method, through a methodology that they develop and then teach. And so there's this archetype that appears across the human spectrum, across mythology, is basically the head of all religions. And so Shiva is, you think about Shiva, he has these long dreads, and he just, the same thing with Jesus, right? He has this long hair. When you look at Bob Marley, he has that long hair. When you look at Russell Brand, he has that long hair. But here's the thing, long hair doesn't necessarily mean that you're the yogi shaman type, but it is a personality trait that comes out in individuals who share this Shiva, this yogi archetype. So you might get certain personality traits, even though there's differences. Like, for example, Shiva might be an ascetic and Russell Brand isn't, but there's still this compelling, similar personality that is similar across the board.
I thought Shiva is a destroyer.
So that's there's symbolism beyond just him being the yogi, the ascetic, and stuff like that. There's the individual, the Adi yogi, who we're talking about is the yogic archetype or the shamanic archetype, and then there's the Trimurti in Hindu philosophy, which is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and that's a different layer of what Hindus talk about when it comes to Shiva.
Okay, so what do you believe about God?
Well, I'm agnostic, right?
Okay.
So I don't know, particularly ontologically, I'm agnostic.
Okay, what does that mean?
I don't know what God is.
Okay.
Right.
But you
I don't
believe
know what
in...
existence is.
I see.
Right? I don't know what consciousness is. I don't know what it is from an ontological point of view. So there's that aspect of it. And so, I mean, all that I say is that I think that there's some type of intelligence to what's going on. You know what I mean? And then everything else is based on what's empirical. Well, the human endeavor, different themes and archetypes that arise within the human experience. To be a loving person, to be a compassionate person. So you get into Plato's, idea of forms, or his ideals of forms. That if we have these human things like love and compassion, and that there has to be an ideal form of that, and that ideal form of that would be God. So I mean, I think that there's ways to relate to what I would assume God to be, in terms of the character, the Asma al-Husna, the attributes of what God might be, based on human experience.
But
there's not much else that I could say.
Isn't human experience one of suffering, and that's an integral part of human experience as well, right?
Right.
So how do you relate that back to the idea of God existing? Because I see an empty world with no one in charge. Yes, there's some order, and it's not just chaos, but there is some order behind the universe. Maybe that's because there's other universes that don't have order, and so there was no natural selection that led to humanity or any sort of intelligent creatures.
Sure.
But there's chaos in the world in terms of animals eating other animals. Not even chaos. That's not the right word. It's just like suffering is so baked into the world, right? Hundreds of millions of humans have experienced war and death, and all sorts of horrible things to a level that I'd say if there was an intelligent God that's that, either he's immoral to allow such a thing, or maybe he just doesn't exist, or maybe he doesn't have a consciousness. It's just is, right? Because we tend to obviously project our own kind of personality traits onto whatever we think of, right? Like aliens always tend to look kind of humanistic or whatever.
Sure.
But maybe it doesn't make sense for God to have any emotions whatsoever, because emotions are again part of the evolution, right? We evolved vengeance because a tit for tat strategy is most effective in survival, right? So jealousy evolved because you want to keep your mate away from other potential threats, and all of these things make sense under evolution, but they don't make sense in a void, right? Like a jealous God or an angry God.
I don't perceive divinity as having emotions. I don't consider love to be an emotion. That's a different conversation. But to answer your question about the problem of evil is basically where you're getting at.
Yeah.
Um, right. So the problem of evil is it's a very tough problem and it's not easy to solve. But the only way that I can understand it is that in order for evolution to be effective, the we have to go through these things in order to learn profound lessons and things of that nature, and that ultimately the suffering that we're going through, as intense as it is, as gross and disgusting as it is sometimes, as challenging as it is, that ultimately these things are temporary and illusory, right? Suffering included.
I would say that many forms of suffering have no ultimate benefit.
Right.
For example, like, the example of war, when you have
Mhm.
your child being like,
Yeah.
whatever, in front of you,
Yeah.
and you can't do anything, and then like a woman has her husband killed in front of her, and like this actually just damages human beings. Like it doesn't,
Sure.
nobody ends up better off because they survive that. I think sometimes we self-justify to ourselves and we say like, a good example is like a breakup. Like people learn a lot from breaking up and they're able to do
Right.
better with the next relationship. Let's say theoretically, possibly, because that breakup is a time of huge self-reflection, because we
Mhm.
we tend to like self-reflect and say, what happened, how did this happen, how did I get in this situation, is it my fault? Not everybody, but some people do. And
Mhm.
but there's definitely a class of suffering that like nobody would want to repeat it. Like your child gets cancer
Right.
or something and you're up night and day, and you lose your sleep, and you have to, let's say you're in the US, you don't have insurance, you have to sell, like it doesn't make you a better person. It actually
Right.
damages people come back from war.
Sure.
So it doesn't seem to me like there's any intentionality. Do you think this God? Well, you did say you're agnostic, to be fair, but
Mhm.
like I can't square that with the existence of a God that is benevolent. Let's say.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's if we assume that benevolence is, that's all that God it would be, right? Is benevolence. I mean, sometimes, a child might cry because you're about to give them,
A
an
vaccine?
injection,
Yeah.
but that's necessary, right? And so my only thing is that yes, these forms of suffering are intense and disgusting, and clearly, and like you said, in many situations there seems to be no benefit.
Yeah.
But I don't think that suffering is necessarily meant to be beneficial in that sense. But as much as it is as a learning process in the evolution of a potential soul. Now, obviously, with Hinduism, you have reincarnation, so it doesn't end with that death and it continues. But regardless of what afterlife scenario you might hypothesize or speculate, the idea is that there's some type of growth, there's some type of evolution happening, and these types of sufferings somehow allow us to progress to the next stage. Like I said, I'm agnostic. I have no clue, bro. None whatsoever. This is what I would imagine is I always start with the premise that if intelligence is at the heart of what's going on, then what are the implications of that and what are the possibilities that this could bring about? So that's kind of how I use my imagination.
Okay.
Right.
So what are the possibilities? So reincarnation, you said, is it
Hmm.
possible?
Like, yeah, I think that it's possible. And I base that off of evolution. I mean, we went from, single-celled organisms to, you know, amphibians and reptiles and mammals and ape-like creatures, and then eventually to Homo sapien. If this is energy evolving, if this is physics evolving, then who is to say that the consciousness of these species isn't evolving as well, and that there's something to the subjective evolution, meaning the evolution of the subjective experience within this realm. And so that would be reincarnation in a sense. Now that might not be reincarnation in a traditional Hindu mind,
Hmm.
or it might be. I don't know. I've heard Hindus explain it that way as well. So I mean, this is us talking about it's complete purely speculative, right?
Hmm.
But the idea is that that species are evolving and that souls are evolving ultimately. Um, and so that's kind of how I would.
So
That's why reincarnation makes more sense to me than some of the other possibilities.
what do you think about the studies they've done on people from specifically, usually it's from cultures where they have like reincarnation as part
Mhm.
of the mythology,
Right.
and they usually it's a child that says they remember,
Hmm.
dying like a horrible death or something, and this happened. And what do you think about those stories? Do you think there's any truth to that?
Right, the Ian Stevenson research. No, I don't. I mean, I think that they're intriguing. The one there's one the one story that I remember. I remember looking at a couple of stories, but the fighter, the jet, the pilot story that was pretty
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, yeah, I heard that one
Right,
too.
right, the pilot,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
But no, I don't take those studies as evidence at all.
Mm.
I think they could mean anything, and I don't even know if it's possible to remember a past life or what that. I've never
Exactly.
I don't remember anything. But the interesting thing about memory is that we don't remember what we ate 2 years ago on Monday, March 13th or whatever, March 13th of 2018
Yeah,
either.
yeah,
So memory works that way. So I don't know.
yeah.
But no, I don't take those stories too seriously.
Okay.
When I was a kid growing up, I remember watching those unsolved mystery stories about the UFO and Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I find them to be entertaining and intriguing at times, but a lot of times it's like, no, I can't take this too seriously.
Mm-hmm. What about
Or,
NDEs?
oh, I take those a lot more seriously.
Near-death
Near
experiences.
death experiences, yeah.
So like, so
I
people
take
when
those
they're
a lot.
when people when they're about to die,
Yeah.
usually they see some sort of tunnel or something,
Mm.
and then sometimes they say they saw themselves or they floated out of their bodies
Yeah.
and they see
Yeah.
themselves on like an operating table. Sometimes
Hmm.
they hear what the people are saying around them. So just to describe what it is before, like in case people don't know what NDEs are. So what do you think about NDEs?
Yeah, no, I think that they're much more fascinating. There's a lot more science to look at that,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot more reports of that historically and in terms of the body of research that we have. So, I mean, and you have grown adults reporting this rather than 5-year-old children.
Yeah.
I don't know what to take
Y-
of a child reporting that they can perceive past lives. But no, I mean, that's the extent of it. I think there's a much bigger body of research around near-death experiences, and I find them to be absolutely fascinating. I think that they contribute towards potential evidence that there might be something else.
Hmm. I have the same sort of skepticism
Mhm.
because I think it's just like one, there'd be no like it does there's how do I say this? It's not necessary that we would be able to experience the next life within this life as our brain is dying anyways. Do you know what I mean? The same way that you said like there's no real way to know for sure that
Right,
you can actually remember like your past life anyways, even if reincarnation was true,
right.
it might not be the case. Sorry, this phone. Yeah. So, and also, the thing about NDEs is, isn't it quite possible that when people are dying, the brain, again, back to the material explanation,
Mhm.
the brain is malfunctioning, the eyesight is, like the optical nerves are dying, and so they're seeing this tunnel, and then
Mhm.
they interpret it based, and the life flashes before their eyes, and is another thing.
Mhm.
Do you not think it's possible or likely that this is
Mhm.
all materialism? I mean, there's a natural explanation for all this.
I mean, you could go that route, but you talk about a coincidence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Talk about a coincidence that the human biology and the human brain is capable of this type of experience first and foremost. That is utterly profound,
Mm-hmm.
as profound as anything psychedelic wise. Um, in that the brain just happens to produce this phenomenology, at the time of death. I mean, how coincidental is that? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you might assume intelligent design that's wired into the biological organism for a reason
Mm.
as
Could
well.
maybe there was an adaptive reason why
Right.
it reduces suffering at the time. But these are like,
But
how common
why
are
would
these?
biology want to reduce suffering? Like, how would biology know to
That's true,
reduce
actually.
suffering?
That's a good point.
I mean,
How common are these experiences? They're not. They're
oh, very common.
Oh yeah.
Very, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have any statistics or anything on hand, but common enough historically and in terms of contemporary body of research. There's a lot more of it compared to the reincarnation reports.
The
Not
one
yeah.
the one thing I did look into at one point, I did look into NDs, and I read about one person that claimed they could see something that was on a shelf above, like almost like the whatever
The
con
shoe.
Yeah. Oh, you
Of the
okay?
shoe.
It's probably the same one, but
Yeah.
like when they actually really looked into it, there was no real evidence that this person was able to see this, and like
Right.
the facts didn't check out like according to what the story was.
Right.
So that was the only like that's what I found. So,
That
but
would be a good experiment, though. Everybody agrees. But who, I mean, who wants to almost die? Who wants to almost come to the verge of death and experiment with that? But no, I mean, in terms of a scientific exploration, if somebody could have an out of body experience and literally report something that they shouldn't know, that they could see something and it floated out of the body and went to the next street over, and here's that. I think that would be, I think from a scientific standpoint that would be pretty convincing evidence. But no, I don't think that we have that yet.
yeah,
Yeah.
and again, it may not even then it may not be possible that like even if there is a next life of some sort, it
Hmm.
may not be the case that this like in between stage actually gives any sort of information about the next life. Like you know what I'm saying? Like if there is something,
Hmm.
maybe we have to be completely dead, right? So
Right.
I'm at the moment, I guess I'm not convinced about that, but I'm definitely keeping an open mind
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's difficult to comment on these things without having the experience. I
mhm.
have not had the near death experience. I've heard a lot about it, read a lot about it. Um, I have had the psychedelic experience, which I can speak to. And after having dude, I consider myself a skeptic. I mean, I don't accept. I'm too skeptical for most theists
Yeah.
and most Hindus even. Like people I'm sure that many Hindus cringe at my skepticism at times, but um, but it's okay. It's how my brain operates.
Do you believe in karma? We have someone in the chat saying believe in karma.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in consequentialism. I believe in consequences, that everything has a consequence to it, cause and effect.
Do you believe
But
that like the idea of karma is you do something bad and something bad will
bad
happen
things
to you?
happen to you. Uh, no, I don't think that it necessarily works that way, or
Okay.
it from a past life or from this life. That if I treated somebody bad, that it's going to come back to teach me a lesson, right? I,
Yeah.
I I mean, I have no reason to make that truth claim. It's fun. It's fun to imagine certain things, like if somebody let's say somebody's truly being negative towards somebody and then they have an experience that's tough for them, you deserve that lesson type of deal. I mean, it's intriguing to speculate these things, but no, definitely not. I think that there's consequences to behavior, to thoughts, to that kind of thing, but that's about it. And
Okay.
I think that there's some skaras, meaning that there's conditioning,
Oh, okay.
right? So you have classical and operant conditioning and like basic in psychology and learn in terms of how human beings learn. And these things and these habits and these addictions and these beliefs, they get so ingrained in us, um, that it becomes difficult to get out of it. So that's samskaras, and samskaras falls within the doctrine, if you will, of karma. And so I think that's another thing really, that's another profound thing that really intrigued me about Hinduism and Buddhism for that matter,
Hmm.
is that it says that meditation, mindfulness, pranayama, hatha yoga, these types of practices
Yeah.
can begin to dissolve the samskaras, the addictions, the habits, the patterns that we've accumulated. So I think that's pure scientific psychology as far as
Yeah,
I'm concerned.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because karma is more about like some metaphysical sort of power or something like that happens.
Right.
Not like not like a natural like psychology or something like that, right?
Consequence. Right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I
Um.
think traditionalist Hindus might describe it as that as well. The condition. Samskaras is a traditional part of karmic theology or philosophy. So that is there traditionally. But I think that the historically the reincarnation mind has assumed certain things that we can't assume. That okay, if reincarnation is real, then this is how karma works type deal, or it probably works. So I'm sure that people use their imagination in the past, and that's what I think all religions is that yes, there's mystical perceptions, there's insights, right? Vipassana, the word vipassana literally means insight. So I do think that there's insights into subjective experience and stuff like that, but I think that a lot of organized religions and the theology that develop is from human imagination a lot of times.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
What does Hinduism say about eating meat?
Right. So you remember you mentioned earlier about animals getting killed and stuff like that. So my take on it is, well, okay, so there's different thing. Historically, you do have meat eaters in Hinduism in India. So Hinduism is anything that any philosophy, anything that developed within the culture of India, pretty much. That's what Hinduism essentially is from the Hindu perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so in terms of so there have been meat eaters in historically in India who might have, during Vedic times there might have been meat eating or slaughtering. Now I'm not a scholar of the Veda, nor am I interested in becoming a scholar. I like learning about these types of things, but bro, I mean, there is an authority in order to understand a framework, a theological or philosophical framework, right? So there's authorities within that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a student of that, of any authority in any field, but I'm not interested in becoming a scholar of any of this. So I could be wrong in some of the things that I say in terms of historical Vedic.
Yeah, I'm more curious about the general like
The meat
Hindu.
eating.
Yeah, like just in
Right.
general, like because I used to think Hindus don't eat meat, but then I realized they do eat meat.
Well, some
And
do. Some people do.
and that's what I'm
Right.
confused about now. Is it
Right.
like Muslims don't eat pork, but well, Islam says don't
No,
eat
it's
pork,
not
but some
like that at
Muslims
all.
do?
Right now. So why does a Muslim not eat pork? Because they think that the meat is filthy because of how the pig acts,
Or
or
actually, it's because the Quran
but
says.
granted, I bet you that the lamb and the cow meat that they're cooking in grease and spices is probably worse for you
The
than a
the filthy
modern day pork chop.
the
But
the filthy thing is not an official explanation given by anywhere in the Quran or the Hadith. It's an
right,
interpretation that Muslims have ascribed to Islam, but I've never actually got the like. I was taught that the better explanation as a Muslim is that because Allah said not to eat meat, sorry, not to eat pork,
right, because,
we don't
right,
eat pork. Not because it's
right.
filthy or any other reason like that, which is again like why did the Jews not eat pork? I'm
Right.
very very curious to answer this
So
question.
Hindus don't have commandments,
Yeah.
right? So Hindus don't have commandments. The idea behind it is that these are conscious beings, right, with a life, that they experience suffering, and whatnot. And so my take on it is that we are evolving from our animal nature into a higher nature, right? Historically, that's evolution is leading us to a higher nature, but we're still animals at at this point in time. We're still animals. So I'm very open to the idea of Homo Deus and evolution to other forms of life or sentience, should I say? And so I don't necessarily think that that biology in an animal sense is necessarily in our future. But the idea is that as animals, we have animalistic tendencies. So everything that we consider evil, everything that causes suffering, everything that involves, everything that we find negative about the human experience is from the animalistic nature. Animals are territorial. Animals kill each other and eat each other, right? And this is what animals do, and we're still animals, and so we still do some of these things. But as we evolve out of our or out of our animal nature into a more divine nature, that we're going to begin to let go of some of these things, including killing animals and eating meat, flesh of other creatures. I mean, if you ever watch a lion devouring, another animal, I don't know if you've actually sat down and actually just watched animals kill each other and eat each other.
Yeah,
You know
I've,
what I mean? It's pretty intense.
it's pretty gruesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty
And so
gruesome.
imagine being eaten alive by a shark or a lion. That is also a scary idea.
Hmm.
And so there's this aspect of it where human beings at least are able to recognize that there's something wrong with this. Now, granted, we can't blame tigers and lions and bears and all this kind of stuff. They don't have consciousness and minds like we do. But at least we are able to witness it and see that there's this unfortunate aspect of animals killing each other in order to survive. But as human beings, we begin to recognize that this is vicious, and that there's other ways of consuming foods that are nutritious and good for you, and don't require death and murder and blood and all that kind of stuff. And so as we get out of our animalistic nature, I think what happens is human beings begin to become less meat. We don't want to eat meat. We want to eat other things and stuff like that.
But meat is so
It's
tasty.
Right.
Yeah,
And so it is, it's right, it's addictive. And that's the thing about the world, right? So from a Hindu perspective, everything in the world is seductive. It is tasty, it is addictive, it is, you know, it gets you high rather than, these highs and drunks of life. And so do we want to absorb ourselves into that which is temporary, that which is illusory, that which won't get us anywhere ultimately? Or is there, or do we want to self-purify? And do we have a reason to self-purify? Or should we just be hedonistic? Everybody has a different idea on what they should or shouldn't do, but just know that there's karma to everything. There's consequences to everything that we do.
What's the karma of eating meat?
I think just from a practical standpoint, it's death. It's killing. There might be some, in terms of what meat does to your own health, it makes you more lethargic. It digests differently than say vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. It can cause, there's people with bad lifestyles, cancers can develop and stuff like that. And so, it all depends on the individual. Although I do think that the future of food is going to be quite different as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. Apparently, through stem cell research, you can grow meat apparently in the future.
Oh, yeah. What they're calling lab meat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone, Beach Price is asking in the questions about one of the sects or one of the Hindu groups that does animal sacrifice.
Right.
Apparently, it says on Wikipedia, Shaktism. They sacrifice goats and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about? That's interesting. I thought that would be like against Hinduism and the
Right.
whole thing about
Well,
like.
Hinduism isn't a monolith, right? So you have atheists, you have agnostics, you have people who are focused on Shiva, people who are focused on Krishna, focused on no personal deity at all, that it's just consciousness, the Advaita types. So you have this variety. In this is what confuses a lot of people, that Hinduism has this diversity within itself, right? And so, yeah, like I said, I don't have an understanding of why the Vedic tradition or part of the Vedic tradition had animal sacrifices and why they continue to have animal sacrifices. Ahimsa is what we're essentially talking about. Some might say.
Yes.
Right.
Which is non-suffering something, right?
Right. So non-violence, right?
Oh,
and
non-violence.
so that's included in killing animals.
Yeah.
And so ahimsa is there in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and it's there as a moral, as an ethic. Ahimsa is there in the Yogic Sutras, and is there in Jainism even before that. And so India has had this history of, and Gandhi was all about ahimsa. And so it's not that ahimsa wasn't there before, it's just that focus on it became more profound within the larger context of what Hinduism is developing into, because Hinduism is developing and evolving in of itself.
Oh, that's
right?
interesting. How's that happening? I mean, what's happening?
Because ideas, perceptions, rituals go. Some rituals might go away. Some ideas might be given up altogether. You know what I mean? And so, Hinduism allows inherently for individuals to change their perspective, to evolve their perspective, to get rid of ancient scriptures such as the Manusmriti altogether, and not care about it or not, so there's that aspect of it where Hinduism is an evolving tradition. Now, there might be some traditionalists, and I've heard some traditionalists say that, yes, Hinduism evolves in many different areas. Specifically, they differentiate the types of scripture, the Smriti and the Shruti, and they'll say that there are certain things that do not change and cannot change. Whereas the broader, for example, the Manusmriti is about how human beings should live, in criminal justice system, that type of thing. Laws can evolve.
They have Sharia law in Hinduism too?
So they don't, but not something like Sharia law. But I would say the Manusmriti did have laws that they applied on people. There wasn't anything like an apostasy law. And I haven't studied the Manusmriti to articulate anything from it, but I do know from my vague understanding of it that there was laws within the Manusmriti that would be applied. Some Hindus might consider the modern day constitution as a Shruti document, meaning that it's a sacred document that represents a social contract, in that it is, just like everything else is, divinely inspired. So So there's that possibility.
So I agree with you in terms of ethics that eating meat is definitely, I'd say, less ethical. I mean, people might get upset at that,
And more
but
animalistic. It's more animal.
yeah, I'm not vegetarian, but I wish I was. Let's put it like that. And I definitely like very much think that it's better if we didn't raise up all of these animals and slaughter them and eat them, and especially the factory farming and all that. I don't know about the whole health. I don't know about the whole health angle, whether it makes sense or not, whether this actually makes you lazy and whatever. Because I do know that like many human societies did very well because of eating meat historically. But
Protein.
I think we're past that point, so that argument is kind of dumb now, because we're not like warrior people that need to go out and like conquer others or whatever. Like we are way past that. Right? I mean, I would think we're getting enlightened as we're going further and becoming better in terms of ethics and morals.
And less animal. Less animal, right?
And we should actually give up eating meat, I think, at some point in a evolution. And I do think that people will look back on us and say, "Wow, I can't believe that we used to do this as humans. This is so disgusting." The thing is, there has to be an alternative and once we have lab meat or and like something like you said, grown, we're able to actually grow meat without actually like having any sort of suffering from animals. I mean, that would be, I think that's going to change the game. It's going to...
Oh yeah, that would change the game for sure.
Yeah. And I wanted to also ask about, is there anything specifically in Hinduism that you think is bad? And maybe it's not, again, it's hard to define Hinduism. That seems like it always comes back to that. But like, is there like specific things that Hindus do that's problematic? One thing I heard about is, one of our mutual friends, I won't say his name, sent a video about drinking camel urine. Not camel. No,
cow urine.
Sorry, cow urine, not camel urine. And apparently it's happening in India that people think is good for you. And I don't know how connected you'd be to that, because obviously you're in America. You converted to Hinduism. You're not living in India, so I don't know what your connection is to like Indian Hindus.
Right.
What is your connection?
No, I mean, I have a lot of acquaintances and friends who are Indian Hindus. Wonderful people. Many of them are traditionalists, not all of them. And so, yeah, I mean, now in terms of what are my objections about some things that Hindus do,
or even in Hindu dogma,
the Hindus that I know.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find good and bad people in every group. So exactly. I'm kind of more curious about like Hinduism itself, if I can say that, like, you know what I mean.
So yeah, I mean, here's the thing. My biggest concerns in terms of Hinduism, and I've always said it, is, first and foremost, is the trusting a guru or a teacher. And here's the thing: we need teachers, right? And I do think that there's saints and sages that are out there, but I've found in my exploration of Hinduism a lot of charlatans, a lot of cult leaders doing magic tricks and stuff like that, like Sai Baba. And so I think there's a concern about who to trust and how to trust and whether to trust, and what the role of the teacher is, right? And then there's people who inherit what they think and what they do based on what the guru says, which is, that's not that's not how my relationship would work with any teacher. I'd probably be arguing with the teacher in a very loving, compassionate, friendly way all the time. Well, what about this? What about that? Why do I have to do this type deal? Or like, well, you know what I mean? And so there's certain aspects of the guru disciple relationship that could be concerning. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to join a cult. Nobody wants to be controlled in terms of what they think or how they behave, or limit themselves to the point where, they're ruining their lives essentially. But at the same time, I think that there are genuine saints and sages and teachers as well, and it's up to the individual to find somebody that they could admire if they need a teacher at all. They might not want a teacher or need a teacher either. So there's that concern.
And Sam Harris talked about this in Waking Up. He talked about the challenge of finding like a proper guru versus frauds.
Right. Absolutely. No, and that's true, and so that was always my primary concern when it comes to Hinduism, because like once you actually like And here's the thing, I actually like Osho, but that's because of his philosophy, his rhetoric, right? But when you actually look at somebody like Satya Sai Baba, it's like, oh my God, like what are these people thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And there's others ones there's one recently who's still living. He's on the run because they're trying to put him in jail. Nobody knows where he's at. And there's a lot of YouTubers who follow this guy. And this was like one of the worst cult leaders. I mean, if you want to think of a cult leader, like this guy, if there's a definition, if there's a picture definition of somebody who's a cult leader, it should be this person by the name of Nityananda. I mean, this guy is a complete charlatan who fooled like a lot of people. A sad thing because he's very genuine, beautiful people who were fooled by this charlatan. And so yeah, that was the biggest heartbreaking part of my witnessing of Hinduism that I saw was this whole Nityananda case. And I have no idea how people are taking this cult leader seriously. So that was probably my most heartbreaking moment with Hinduism. Was like, wow, how can you let this man deceive you?
Yeah, this is
So
universal, not just to Hinduism. They're all
right, of course,
like people say the Messiah, and people are falling
yeah,
for that. People are
100%,
saying like it's humanity has this
right,
problem, and
yeah,
certain individuals are prone to fall for these narcissistic type of deceiving, psychopathic,
yes,
leader type, charismatic characters, and they come and they fool people, and
yeah,
they don't tell you in one day that you're gonna be like, like naked with me in the bed, but like
right,
it starts
exactly,
slowly, right? And it's like, oh, I'm just gonna talk to you, and then they fall for it, right? So
right,
we have this weakness, I think, as humanity. But
right. No,
what?
there's Christians, there's Muslims that are like that. We talked about the Sufi Sheikh as well.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, so and it occurs across the spectrum where there's charlatans in every religion,
But it,
and
but
then there's genuine souls too.
but what about Hinduism in itself? Like not just like bad people in Hinduism, but like is it
Okay,
like in Islam? I would say like
like theologically.
yeah, like for example in Islam there's I can think of so many bad things. For example,
Oh,
stoning adulterers to death, which is part of Sharia law. Even the idea
okay,
of like not dealing with it rather than punishing it, like
all right.
something like
Well,
that, for
historically,
example,
you
or
have the caste system, and you have something like sati, right? That
which is
developed in India.
sati is when the wife is to be burned alive, right?
But she burned herself alive
Wow.
with her husband. And I've heard of why Hindus. So for example, they were worried about the Mughals or whoever, that if their husband's dead, that now they're under threat from these outside sources. I mean, like I said, I'm not a historian, nor do
Yeah.
I intend to be. But in general, I know that these practices like sati and the caste system are probably the two most disturbing uh, parts of what developed in India. But the way that I look at it, and I've always looked at it, is that what about slavery? What about what America has done to Japan or Native Americans or Africans or Japan or wherever else? I mean, I just look at it as mistakes that are made by human beings, and we're trying to refine, evolve to the point we're not doing these things anymore. So I don't
Yeah.
see it. I don't see the caste system or sati as a part of my religion. You know what I mean? I just see that this is a part of what historical India went through.
Hmm.
Right.
But it still exists. Like it doesn't
It
does it
still
have?
exists.
Well, not just that. Doesn't it have a connection to the
It,
holy books? Like
it, it has a connection to the Manusmriti. I mean, in terms of the bad parts of it, it has connections to Manusmriti. In terms of how the Veda, to be honest, the way that the Veda describes it, it doesn't say treat these lower castes like this way.
yeah.
The Vedas doesn't say that. The only thing the Vedas talks about the body of God, and it talks about the interdependence of different roles that human beings play. It talks about basically hierarchy, right? In Jordan Peterson's rhetoric.
Hmm.
So it's saying that there's inevitable hierarchy. There's some people who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and there's people who are on the spiritual side, and then there's the warriors, and then there's there's the spiritual scholars, and if for human beings to make sense of the hierarchies that they're experiencing makes complete sense, and that's all that the Veda does.
Hmm.
The Veda doesn't tell anybody to persecute anybody or treat anybody bad. Can't these are untouchables or anything of the sort. That developed into Hindu culture as time went by. To be fair,
So but do we place any blame on the dogma or the elevation of certain books like for example, when you like one example Sam Harris gives is by putting the Bible on, you know, epistemological, what am I saying? Like by putting on a higher level and, you know, looking at the words of the Bible as coming from the inspired speech of God, or the inspired speech of humans that was, you know, inspired by the Holy Spirit or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's certain things that are, certain decisions that are made in that society. For example, George W. Bush, you know, blocked stem cell research because according to them, any single cell is
Right.
alive from the moment of conception, so that
All
a
right.
stem cell, even though it could be used to like grow new organs or whatever, like he's completely blocked that, right?
Right.
So that's one example, and I'm thinking like, isn't there some fault in Hindu dogma as well, that it's not just humans making mistakes. Yes, humans do make mistakes, and like,
Is it being derived from scripture?
yeah, like being derived,
Okay.
and not just the scripture, but putting that scripture as a source of truth claims, right?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I mean, I would say that Hinduism, first of all, has hundreds of books, right? Thousands of books. And the Manusmriti just happens to be one of them. And the most conservative of Hindus that I've met, traditionalist Hindus, you know, even people that I would consider right-wing conservative types, they even scoff at the Manusmriti. You know, it's like a Salafi. I mean, they would hate to be described, to even compared to the BJP folks, would hate to be described, or the right-wing conservative would hate to be described, or the literalist, let's say if there are literalist Hindus, would hate to be compared to Salafis of Islam. And you know what I mean? Because Salafis can be pretty extreme. But let's say that there's that type of Hindu. You know, if you consider that the most conservative literalist types of Hindus who are utterly traditionalist and want nothing to do with postmodernism, even they scoff at the Manusmriti. Even they say that the caste system is something that we reject. And so I'm glad that that's the case in India. But that doesn't change the fact that there's so much caste discrimination in India. But my explanation with that there's, you know, there's no justification for casteism or racism or prejudice or persecution of anybody. But I do see that India is a billion, you know, there's a billion people in India. There's all types of rural areas and uneducated areas where I'm sure that a lot of this continues. But that doesn't take away the fact that there are other individuals who feel like they're the elite, but that's in any society, right? And then they treat people below them who are not as wealthy and educated as them. They treat them pretty poorly. And so, I mean, I think that happens in India, happens in every society. But do I think that it's theological? Do I think that it's scriptural? No. Hindus have like thousands of books, hundreds of books. Most of them are discarded, not taken seriously. The primary ones like the Gita and the Veda and the Upanishads are the ones that they take seriously. And those scriptures don't require anybody to do anything related to the caste system. So Hinduism is awesome in the sense that it is a framework that should be the framework of all religions on how to evolve philosophically and theologically. Not practically, because India has all of the problems that every society has, and it continues. And some of it is rooted in traditionalism, traditionalism that has casteism within a Hindu framework. So I don't try to say that the caste system is not Hinduism. Okay, I say that whatever developed in India, regardless of how it developed or to what extent it developed, if the Hindus want to be consistent with that, then the caste system and sati is something that developed within Hindu culture. It is what it is. If Buddhism is Hinduism according to them. If Guru Nanak is Hinduism according to them. If Mahavir is Hinduism to them. If all of these things that developed within the context of India is Hinduism, then so is the caste system. So is sati, regardless of how much you reject it. But Hinduism inherently evolves and is allowed to shed these things, and should. And you know what I mean?
So let's just take a few questions and wrap this up. Guys, I'm speaking to Farhan Qureshi. He's an ex-Ahmadi, ex-Sunni, ex-Salafi Hindu. And we've been discussing with him about his experiences, his beliefs. And Farhan is a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for over 2 years now. Someone's asking, Calisthenics Wade is asking, what does Farhan think about the theory that the Kaaba is a Shiva temple and that they do Hindu rituals like the way they dress? They must be talking about the Umrah.
Right. No, I mean, I don't think that there's a correlation. No, I don't think there's a
I don't
correlation.
think so either. It's definitely some proto-paganism or something that went into
Sure.
Islam, that makes a lot more sense
Right.
than saying Hinduism. I don't see how Hinduism would have got to the middle of the desert.
Right. I don't think that there's historical evidence of the sort. It's speculate. It's like the Illuminati. Everybody, the people see certain patterns and they come up with some wild theory. The conspiracy theorists come up with these types of theories all the time. You know what I mean? Oh, look at these signs or this sign. It means that X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
I mean, the little bit. The same thing with Jesus went to India. I don't buy that either.
Oh, the
I mean,
Ahmadi claim, right?
right. But no, there's some. Okay. So that's a whole. This is an interesting topic. Can I touch on this for
Yeah,
a
yeah,
second?
yeah, yeah,
All
yeah.
right, cool. All right. So Ahmadis believe that Jesus went to India post crucifixion. All right. Whereas some have argued that Jesus actually went to India prior to his ministry in Israel. And
Oh, yeah?
there are two different claims. So Ahmadi's claim is very very different than
Oh.
this the whole Jesus went to India, learned Hinduism and Buddhism,
What?
came back to India, and then taught his version of spirituality, whether that's
Wow.
Gnosticism, whatever you want to call it. Now, Gnosticism is very similar to Hinduism. Now,
Mhm.
it's a perennial. Now, in terms of the Christian version of the perennial philosophy, I would say that Gnosticism is the closest to the perennial philosophy within the context of Christianity, and it's
Mhm.
very similar in a lot of ways to Hinduism. So I do see similarities between Gnosticism and Hinduism. But do I think that Jesus went to India and studied Buddhism and Hinduism and then came back to Israel? No, not necessarily. I mean, I don't think that there's any evidence for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, people like these stories because they're interesting, but I don't buy into these stories personally. I mean, if you would like to entertain these types of stories, go for it. It's your prerogative. I don't.
What do you think about Muhammad being from Petra,
From
Jordan?
where?
Petra.
Oh, from Jordan rather
Yeah.
than from
Yeah.
Mecca?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not even familiar with that theory.
Oh, okay. So Dan Gibson has a
Okay.
documentary. He's a historian, and it's called The Sacred City.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a book called Quranic Geography.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually given a bunch of evidence for this claim, which is actually quite interesting. There's some evidence for this, so we won't get into that because you haven't
Okay.
looked into it. The other thing, someone's bin Kaka in the comments is saying only hunter gatherer tribes don't have caste, but as society evolves, caste distinction becomes natural. Even honeybees have caste system to survive as a group.
He's saying that tribalism essentially is natural. Well, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with the fact that tribalism is natural, in the sense that, like I said, even animals are territorial and tribal. Yeah, but here's the thing about tribalism: a family unit is a tribe, right? You and your wife and your kid and your 5 kids—that's a tribe. So, can I accuse you of tribalism because all of you guys are very conformist to some degree
Mm-hmm.
to each other's views and likes and dislikes? No. So tribalism is a natural phenomenon. And so if Indians, same thing with different races, right? You have, and even within races, you have various tribes. So different castes, right? And so no, I do think that it's a natural phenomenon that we're evolving out of. I
Yeah.
think the future of tribalism. I think that the future of tribalism dissolves, although you're still going to have geography. So India, you can't just India is still going to be India geographically, and the entire history of India, you know what I mean, and its lineage is always going to be that. Even if, say, 1,000 years from now, let's say we build transportation where I can go to India in 2 minutes and go to China in 30 minutes or whatever, and then procreation causes an exponential increase in interracial, procreation and marriages and stuff like that, and eventually all races dissolve, or if transhumanism happens and race dissolves, you know what I mean? So there's still going to be geography, and there's going to be different types of humans. So yeah, I do think that tribalism is a natural phenomenon. The objection against tribalism is then where it's my tribe and forget everybody else, and I'm going to be racist and discriminate against other tribes because they're so different. And tribalism is dangerous in the sense that people isolate one another. They isolate themselves. So one way that I actually get along with the BJP folks is that they're against separatism, right? Making Kashmir into a different state, Pakistan into a different state, Bangladesh into a separate state. And I'm not being an idealist. It's the problems of tribalism, and even Khalistan, the Sikhs wanting their own state, is an issue in India. I don't know if you've heard of Khalistan, but the Sikhs want their own state just like Muslims got their own state, right? The problems and the dangers behind this type of tribalism is that people become so isolative that they isolate themselves from the other, and then when you isolate yourselves from the other, the tension and the racism and the discrimination becomes that much more intense.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you get to know one another, those boundaries begin to dissolve.
Yeah.
So I'm not for that type of tribalism.
Well said. Beach Price is asking, how can one find out what is accurate to Hinduism if everyone can get something different from it? Like, how do we know?
What's attractive about Hinduism?
No. How can we find out what is accurate about Hinduism if everyone's if everyone gets something different out of it? Like some
Hinduism
of them. Go ahead.
It represents the human condition. When you look at the human world, we're all diverse. We all have different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the reality of the situation. And we have to come to terms with that and be okay with that, because there is relative perception is an empirical fact.
Mm-hmm.
What Abdullah is experiencing in his own mind and what he believes is genuine to you. What I'm experiencing within myself is genuine to me. What a Christian is experiencing within themselves is genuine to that Christian. The relative perception is an empirical fact.
Mm.
And so Hinduism represents that relativism to an extent. That doesn't mean that we can't agree on some truths and objectivity and stuff like that. But I think Hinduism is symbolic of that, in that sense, that diversity of thought and religious expression, spiritual expression is an awesome thing. And everybody should seek truth within themselves.
Mm-hmm. And hold on. So Khalil is saying, Khalil Andani is saying, Farhan, when you describe the Islamic concept of hell, what are you basing it on? Islamic theologians, including Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Arabi, Mullah Sadra, saw hell as not perpetual and all end up in paradise. So I'll just answer for myself first, because as an Orthodox Muslim, for 15 years of being a Muslim, I thought hell is forever. And then I found out, right when I was leaving Islam, through debate and discussion with Muslims, that there is a minority opinion that hell is not forever and it'll eventually be extinguished based on some hints in the Quran. And some of the Muslims I used to tell this to, they used to scoff at me and say, yeah, right, like, I've read the Quran, it doesn't say that. So Khalil is trying to say that this isn't like the Islamic position. The Islamic position is that everybody ends up in paradise and hell is not perpetual.
So my take on it is this. I mean, first of all, you're distracting yourself from the issue. I made this argument against Abdullah and Lucy in our debate about how you're distracting yourself from cruel and unusual punishment, and you're accusing God of cruel and unusual punishment first and foremost. Forget about whether it's eternal or not. The fact that people are going to be tortured because we have the wrong theology, right? We're not even talking about morality here. Because I committed shirk, and I believe, or because I was an atheist, because I was a kafir, because I genuinely thought something else was true, I'm going to be burned in hell for eternity. Because I genuinely studied Islam and say, you know what? I don't think that has anything to do with the nature of reality. I don't think that's true. I try to understand it to the best of my ability. I think I understand it. I don't think that's true. Because of that, people are tortured, okay? Cruel and unusual punishment. And so there's that. How can human beings be more compassionate than God, right? That's another aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And then yes, there is the argument of whether it's eternal, and whether finite actions should deserve an infinite punishment.
Yeah, well, he's saying it's not infinite. He's saying it ends.
Right. Okay, so if it's not. So in the situation with Ibn Taymiyyah, so first of all, that is a minority opinion. It still doesn't take away from the justice aspect of God, right? The people are still being tortured for a temporary time. And why? Because this jealous God didn't want you to commit shirk, because you couldn't figure out the mystery of the universe
Well, and
because
then
you chose the wrong religion. So
some
that's my
some
whole rejection is of hell.
some Muslims would say, and I kind of see what kind of see where he's coming from. I don't think it's coherent in a sense, but
Uh,
some Muslims like Hamza Yusuf, he has a paper that he wrote where he says that you're only a kafir if you like truly disbelieved in Allah.
where
So
who would find me that person? Find me that person. I would love to see who that person is. And I could argue all of the arguments from determinism in terms of how and why that person's mind was shaped the way that it was. It's it makes the whole Islamic Christian perspective that people are going to go to hell for theology, for their rejection, for their sinful behavior. None of it makes sense.
mhm.
None of it makes sense.
Yeah, and how can you like if you're saying that only the ones that actually rejected Allah and they knew Allah, so what does that mean? They're crazy,
Yeah,
right?
right. Exactly. You always could come up with some psychological reason in terms of why their brain is resisting that quote unquote reality.
Yeah,
You can't get away. You can't get around that.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly, exactly. And guys, I just want to say thanks one more time to Farhan. I'm gonna share your channel as well. Farhan makes videos from time to time as well. So I'm going to share his channel here. And it is pretty late. We've kept you here for a long time, and this was a great conversation. Is there anything else you want to add until we meet again next time? I think you're going to be having a conversation soon, right? On with Sharik.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. I think that he's going to be very. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. I think he's going to be raw and real, and he knows that I want him to be raw and real. And I think he's going to get pretty. I think he's going to get. Yeah, well, we'll see. I think he'll be respectful and cordial as well, and also realize that we are dealing with, a lot of people who are beautiful, wonderful people that happen to be Hindu, and that we all ultimately want to try to get along. I think that we're probably going to talk a little bit about spirituality. I think he's very interested in Indian politics. What I want to do is I want to talk to him about his experience in India because he was born and raised in India, and so we're going to talk about his experience in India, his perception of Indian politics. Just because I'm not in India, so he understands Indian politics much better than I do, and he can help educate me. And then obviously he's going to have a lot of things to say that disagree with people in India, maybe Hindus in India, particularly the Hindutva BJP types. And then I'll bring on Kushal, and then Kushal and Sharik, and I'll moderate their debate. So that should be fun.
Sounds good. Okay, everyone, thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned. Check out Farhan's channel for some other interesting conversations. Sharik is a mutual friend of both of us. He's also an ex-Muslim, and I've had him on my channel once as well. So there's some new connections happening here, and we're going to see some definitely a very good conversation once it comes up. So you'll need to subscribe though in order to be notified of when that conversation is happening, because that's going to be on Farhan's channel. Okay, and that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the stream. So you say namaste when you start. What do you say when you leave? What's the end?
Oh, I didn't say anything when I started.
Yeah, I was going to say namaste to you.
I said goodbye. Yeah,
I was gonna
namaste.
say-
It's basically a bow to the divine in you.
Okay. I was going to say namaste to you, and I forgot. So namaste right now.
Namaste to you.